What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Mindful Muscle podcast. Welcome to the Mindful Muscle Facebook group Q&A with coaches Paul Klingon and Jake Parker. Jake, what's up? What's going on, man?
Not too much. Happy to be here, Paul.
Happy to be here. I feel like I've been seeing your face a lot. We had a good book review on Tuesday. We did a training. Jake took everyone through a training on why the scale goes up and kind of the scientific reasons why and why most of the time it's not fat gain. So definitely be sure and check that out in the Facebook group. We have a link that we can send you if you want that and want to watch it. You're maybe not on Facebook, but now we're talking Q&A. And so client questions, and excited to dive into that with you.
Yes, sir. So I'll kick us off here. Like Paul said, I'm Jake. I'm one of the E4 Fit coaches. So the first question I highlighted here today that we wanted to get to was this client is asking about vascularity, specifically saying, if I want to see my bicep veins, how can I make that happen? Goes on to ask, is that a dream that I should let go? Is it a different kind of training? So when it comes to vascularity, which is what we say when we're referring to seeing veins in the body, really it's mostly just going to come down to two things, which is genetics and leanness. So we probably all know someone in our lives who maybe they're into working out, maybe not, but they just seem to have a lot of vascularity. You can see their veins easily. A lot of this is just your genetic predisposition to show those veins. Do you have thick veins that are protruding or not? And then the leanness is the second thing. So if you really want to start seeing vascularity in your biceps, in your back and your chest, wherever it is, it's mostly just going to come down to reducing your body fat percentage. So I think that something that's important to note here is you might kind of want to, and this is easier said than done, but switching the goalposts when it comes to something like vascularity. Is it cool? Is it interesting to see? Can it be a fun goal to go after? Sure. But I think that this reminds me of something that a lot of people get hyper fixated on, which is like seeing your abs, seeing your six pack. Is that a fun thing to have happen? Is it possible? Yes. But sometimes it is doing a lot of work to get to something that you think is going to matter that really isn't going to matter that much. So why do you want to see bicep veins? You think that other people are going to see it as cool? Do you think it's going to be impressive in the gym? Like try to extrapolate that out. And again, not saying that you can't go after aesthetic goals like this. It's sometimes fun to really push and get to something extreme like this, but also understanding that it's not going to totally change the way you look at yourself. It's not going to totally change the way that other people look at you. So it is mostly going to come down to your genetics and your leanness. But I think before you dive into something like that and making that a goal, you have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why do I want this?
Yeah, I think that's a really good introduction to that. And to your point, the genetics and the leanness, I want to tease those two out because I think some people might listen to this and be like, oh, well, it's genetics. I can never do that.
Yeah.
I would say genetics is more how the vascularity reveals itself. Anyone can get to the leanness to where they can see veins. Now, you can look at one person that is, they'll say 10% body fat, another person 10% body fat, and their veins are going to your point, look different. And they're going to, it's almost like a road. Like it looks like a different map on someone's arm or someone's back or someone's neck or someone's forearms, then it's going to look on yours. So in this one specifically, like you can think of like the big bicep vein that goes down the head of the bicep, right? I have friends where their bicep veins goes horizontal. I can think of a specific client where his like did like a bunch of S's and the vein was just like all over the place. And so in terms of like wanting your veins to go a specific direction, that's like wanting your abs to look specific in terms of like the size. You can't control that. That is going to 100 be genetics. And to your point, some people are going to have a higher propensity to do that. Now, that said, at a certain level of leanness, you do see more muscle tone. You do see more muscle definition. You do see vascularity. And so don't let, I say this for a lot of different reasons, but you might have good genetics. You just haven't put them to work. And so getting to that level of leanness or losing 20 pounds, people say, that's not my genetics. I can't lose weight. Well, have you applied the principles long enough to be able to do that? My guess is no. And so to the point I want to make with this in terms of leanness, think of it as anytime I talk about vascularity or tone, I think of the tide going out. So when the tide goes out, it's going to reveal small rocks. It's going to reveal big rocks. So if you have big muscles and the tide's only out 40%, you might be able to see them more. So in strength training and hypertrophy training and building your muscle tissue, you're essentially building those rocks. And maybe at high tide, you can see some big rocks. Medium tide, you can see some medium rocks. Low tide, you can see the smallest rocks. It's going to be at low tide, low body fat percentage, that you're going to see things like abs, like smaller muscles, like little striations of the muscle, or vascularity. And so don't think of it as like you can't do it. You just need to have low tide or a low body fat percentage in order to be able to see it. But having bigger muscles is going to help that low tide not need to be as low. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. And I think that another factor in this is, what are you referring to as far as just walking around, seeing your veins? I know that you have trained people for photo shoots before. People obviously usually like to get that vascularity going for a photo shoot. It's something you can kind of bring about in the short term too, by pumping up. When you're in the gym, when you're on your halfway, 3/4 of the way done with your workout, you're going to see a lot more vascularity than when you wake up in the morning, than when you're just sitting at your desk at work. So it's something that I guess you kind of have to think about the intention of it as well, and knowing that it'll express itself in different ways. And something else that comes to mind for me, I think in terms of genetics, yes, you're definitely right. I think the most important thing is to commit to a process and make sure that you're not just using genetics as a way to bow out, but also understanding that I think too often, and especially as someone who's grown up with access to the internet, seeing people on Instagram that are fitness models, influencers, etc., it can be easy to see someone with a specific attribute or body part and be like, I want to be like that. So a really easy example that I've pointed to before is, there's a bodybuilder from the 80s. His name's Tom Platz, and he's famous for having like the biggest legs ever. His legs were gigantic. And so you can't necessarily look at that and be like, I'm going to squat every day, I'm going to divert all this volume to my legs, et cetera, do these exercises and expect to look like Tom Platz, because he had a specific genetic predisposition to have gigantic legs. It's actually really crazy. If you do a quick Google search to look at this guy's legs, they called him the quad father, I think. But understanding that you have to base your goals off of reality, and not just, I saw someone who's very vascular, and so I want to try to get to that. I think I can get to that. It's kind of an even mix of dialing into the process and also having your goals based in reality.
Yeah, totally. Not to hammer this one home, which I feel like we do on a lot of podcasts, but I think of this as like a sports athlete. Like if someone wants to be a center and they are 7 feet tall and they were to double their ability, they already have a high base. So doubling that base makes them maybe like an NBA player, a Hall of Famer. If you are 5'7" and you want to be a center and you 4x your rating, you won't even get close to that.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that makes sense. But it's essentially like, if you double down on the things you already are really good at, you're going to be able to go so much further. Versus if you double down on your weakness or something that you literally are not built to do, you're only going to be able to see so much progress. And not to say don't work on your weaknesses, because you should get them to an adequate level. But you might find so much more joy if you are an endurance runner, naturally have like a natural propensity to run marathons, and then you double down in training on that. Being good at things is fun. And
Mm-hmm.
seeing success is fun. I think you'll have more fun if you double down on what you're good at.
Yeah.
Cool, cool. Let's dive into the next question. How to think about lifting to failure. So this one I got recently and actually get it a lot. But the two things that we'll teach within the E4 Fit method when we're teaching people how heavy they should lift, because that's really another way to think about this, is how much weight should I lift? And so when we program, majority of the time our sets are going to have rep ranges. So think we'll use 10 to 15 reps for a set for this example. I want my client to find failure or close to failure within that 10 to 15 rep range. So if you have 3 sets of 10 to 15 reps of, let's say, dumbbell incline bench press, and you can do 30 pounds for 15 reps, all 3 sets, you should go heavier. You should go heavier until you can't hit 15. So that's the first way to be able to judge how much weight you should be lifting. Then within that, we want to moderate or manage really the intensity, because you don't want to go till failure, true failure, every single time. That's going to wear out your nervous system, and that's going to make it really hard for you to recover. And so what we do is we look at it week 1 to week 4, sometimes week 5, And we want to say week 1, 7 out of 10 RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion. And then it scales up 7, 7.5, 8, 9, 9.5, 10. So that last week of your month-long training block, then you go and push it to your absolute max, to failure. But you're going to want to leave 3 reps in the tank, 2 reps in the tank, 1 rep in the tank as you go up towards that final week. And I say reps in the tank, RPE, reps in reserve is another one that you'll see in our programs that you'll hear me talk about. Reps in reserve means how many reps you are from failure. Rate of perceived exertion, RPE, so reps in reserve is RIR, RPE is rate of perceived exertion. They're in a way inverses of each other. So a 7 RPE is 7 out of 10. A 3 RIR is 3 reps in reserve, so 3 reps from a 10. So it takes a little bit of experience to be able to know, okay, I am truly 1 or 2 reps away from not being able to get this up, so I'm going to rack it. But I think the best way to think through like what is true failure, and this is like just kind of like a funny example, but it's like picture The Rock counting your reps, or picture your celebrity crush counting your reps. You got a girl that you like, picture them watching you, be like, come on, Tommy, you got this. How many more reps are you going to get if your like crush or someone you look up to is watching you? That's true failure. Now, I think where a lot of people fail in the gym, and I'm doing air quotes, is they let themselves off the hook. They're like, oh yeah, that was good. I'm uncomfortable. Like that counts. It doesn't count. That's not failure. Failure is muscle failure, form failure, and literally not being able to do it. So then if you back out 3 reps from not being able to do it, you're at 3 reps in reserve, or a 7 RPE. So then you want to find that 3 reps in reserve or 7 RPE inside of the rep range of 10 to 15, which is why I like doing a rep range as opposed to just saying, do it for 12 reps. A specific number is good if you're doing percentage-based training and you know what 82% of your 1 rep max is. Most of our clients and most people outside of people in powerlifting or working in sports do not have those kind of numbers and don't have access to that kind of data. So it makes sense to make this a little bit more of a subjective from a weightlifting standpoint, or from the client standpoint, to have it be a little bit more qualitative. And the thing that I like too is you can regulate it based on how you're feeling that day. 3 reps in reserve on a day you feel like absolute trash might be 11 reps instead of 13 that you had the week before, but you got poor sleep, you're super stressed, that's all you can get. And so it allows the client, it allows you as a lifter to really modulate your intensity as you need. And then that way, once a month, you're really getting after it for some big compound specific lifts or some big, plyometric or agility based movements.
Yeah. And something I would add to this is a good way to know that you're getting close to failure is the reps are going to start to slow down a lot. So if you're at the beginning of a set of 10 and those first 3, 4, 5, 6 reps, you're going to be able to do them pretty quickly and efficiently. As you get closer to failure, it's going to be more of a grind. You're going to be a lot slower as your muscles reach that point of failure. And another thing I would add here is there is a difference between technical and absolute failure. So technical failure is when you can no longer do a lift with perfect technique and execution. And absolute failure means you just can't do it at all. You can't do the lift at all. So there's some exercises where it's more and less safe to go to absolute failure. Isolations are usually pretty safe to go to absolute failure. So it's, for example, on bicep curls, if you're swinging your body a little bit on the last rep or two, probably not going to do a lot of damage there. Whereas something like the squat, you want to be more aware of just pushing to technical failure and not absolute failure, because so much more can go wrong with a squat. There's so much more technicality there that you don't want to push it to where you're cheating and get those last couple reps. Whereas that might be okay with, like I said, a bicep curl, a lateral raise. So keeping that in mind as well.
Yeah, I think to dive into this one at another angle, I think we've covered it on a couple Q&As ago, but also thinking about what's actually failing. Is it your grip failing? Is it your heart rate that's failing? Is it your, stability, and you're losing your balance? So that's another thing to think about. But you make a really good point. Like going to failure on a squat without a spotter, without a rack, and like without good form, like that's so much more dangerous than going to failure on a tricep extension, right? Where it's a single joint movement. So a lot of things to think about. I think this would be a good one if you're listening to this and you're like, man, It makes sense, but what about this? Just drop a comment below this in the Facebook group, and we're more than happy to answer that question. Cool, cool. And actually, there's a really good segue into the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Is CrossFit a good way to build muscle long term? So I actually grabbed a couple studies that I'm going to reference with this so that I'm not just making stuff up. And I'll preface this with, as well as my background in lifting is I did a lot of power and Olympic lifting for baseball, college baseball, Division I baseball at Washington State. So power cleans, hang cleans, like a lot of the big barbell movements. That was when I was exposed to that. And I did a lot of that in my younger 20s. And that was very driven for performance. Towards my upper 30 or my later 20s and into my 30s, I'm more thinking longevity and aesthetics. So I've trained at a CrossFit gym as like a personal trainer and watched a lot of training. I've never gone to CrossFit classes for an extended period of time and been like, I do CrossFit. So take that as you will. But when I think of general population doing CrossFit and the question, is it a good way to build muscle long term? I don't think general population wanting to focus on an aesthetic goal would be best served in a CrossFit setting. And the reason I say that is because the rate of injury, both anecdotally and from a aesthetic standpoint, is so high. And when you get injured, you inhibit your ability to do something long term. My favorite saying from Mark Schlereth, and it's not my favorite saying, but it's a saying that I always remember, is Mark Schlereth. He was I think, lineman for the Denver Broncos, and you'd always say this on NFL Live, the best ability is availability.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, I don't care if you're an all-pro wide receiver. If you're not healthy to play, you're worth nothing. You're not any good. And so if you can't go to the gym consistently 5 days a week, 4 days a week, whatever your split is, and get good lifts in, it doesn't matter how strong you are because you're only as strong as your ability to go to the gym. So from just a number standpoint, and this is coming from the Muscle Strength Pyramid by Eric Helms, Annie Morgan, Andrea Valdez. When we look at bodybuilding, there's a study in there that says bodybuilding is going to have 0.24 to 1 injury per 1,000 hours versus CrossFit, which is going to have 3.1 injuries for every 1,000 hours. And on top of that, you have strongman 4.5 to 6.1, Highland Games 7.5 per 1,000 hours. So you're more likely to get injured training for performance because you're pushing your body's ability to the absolute limit. So coming back to the question, is CrossFit a good way to build muscle long term? Can you build muscle doing it? Absolutely. If it's programmed really well, can you build muscle really fast? Yeah. Is there a really cool community component of CrossFit? 100%. Is it something that you can do long term? Unlikely unless you are a physical freak and you have really good mobility and you're focused on form and not just trying to do ego lifts over and over and over. And that's where I say for general population, which is going to be a majority of the people listening to this, your job is to be a computer programmer, a real estate agent, a mom, a dad. You're not training for performance. You're not going to the CrossFit Open. So if your goal is to compete in a CrossFit event or something similar, then yeah, do that. If your goal is to be really lean or build some muscle and have longevity, CrossFit probably isn't the approach to do that. And when I look at programming for clients and for myself, I want to find a sweet spot between functional movements, lunges, presses, rows, pull-ups, things that you would do even in just daily life. But I also want to have an element of bodybuilding because aesthetics is important to me. So if performance is important to you, train for performance. If aesthetics is important to you, train for aesthetics. Gotta be looking at your nutrition here. And that's another thing too with CrossFit. There's so much volume. People lose so much weight on it because they're so active, which is great. But if you're
Yeah.
trying to build a lot of muscle, you're going to need to be in a calorie surplus. Your nutrition is going to need to be on point. Is that something you're looking at? So it's a long-winded answer. And there's one more study. I've got the link somewhere around here. I was just saying that overall injury rate, and this is from the Human Kinetics Journal, overall injury rate was 20% in the study they did. The shoulder joint was the most often injured joint across all exercises. 25% of injuries were shoulder joint. So, and that's right in line with what I see with so many clients. Torn labrum, shoulder dislocated, just pain in general from trying to push weight overhead that they had no business pushing overhead. You look at things like doing 20 box jumps at the end of a 20-minute EMOM, and it's like box jumps an explosive movement. You're going to be gassed doing that. You're going to absolutely destroy your shin. And I've seen people like absolutely wreck their leg or even break their leg trying to do their 20th box jump on the last set, on the last round. And it's just like the juice isn't worth the squeeze to me. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll
and
let you talk.
I think that the most poignant thing to point out here is that CrossFitters are usually the most overtrained population of people. And, you and I talk about it every podcast because it's such an important point. And every year that goes by, I feel like I realize this more and I implement this more in my own life. But the recovery component of training is so important. If you are going in and getting the best quality workouts in, but you're constantly throughout the year in a calorie deficit, you're constantly sleeping 4 or 5 hours, your body is going to be it's not going to be in the ideal position to build muscle. You're not going to feel good. Your body is going to be constantly run down and stressed. And that is no way to go about things in a sustainable manner. So I think that focusing on that recovery is something that we're gonna do a lot with our clients as well. And one of the injury components, one of the things I wanted to point out as far as injury is, someone might get scared, oh, well, if even bodybuilding has some injuries now and then, maybe I should just do nothing. But the important thing to point out is doing something like functional bodybuilding is going to prevent you from getting injured in just day-to-day life. Getting out and playing with your kids, helping a friend move. If you're doing exercises that are strengthening your body in a functional way, that's going to help prevent injuries just in day-to-day life. So really, doing a smart plan and, of course, focusing on your nutrition and your recovery is the best way to not get injured at all. So it's not to say that there's inherent risk in going and lifting weights. Of course, anytime you do something physically demanding, there is, but I would say there's 10 times, if not more, risk to just not working out at all, because then your body is going to be a lot more brittle, a lot more likely to get injured just in something day to day that you're doing, that you're taking place in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have some really good coaches that I know that I've worked with, that I've been mentored under or with. And when you have a really smart CrossFit coach and they know their shit, they're going to be taken care of. They're going to make sure you're not doing things that you shouldn't be doing. They're going to make sure that you're not doing, 30-pound snatches for 20 minutes straight and just like getting you tired. Like, I can get you tired. Go do 100 burpees in a row. Boom, you're tired. You're also probably going to destroy your shoulders and your lower back in the process of doing that. So you just got to ask yourself, what is my goal? How can I get to my goal in the most efficient way possible and with the least likelihood of falling off, injuring myself long term so I can't do anything? And now you've got to worry about a slipped disc injury for the rest of your life, or now you got to worry about a torn labrum for the rest of your life. And that's where I come to the functional bodybuilding you were talking about. Marcus Philly is a good guy that I see a lot on social media that does a lot of this. He still does a lot of like very technical based lifts, but the guy's also a freak, works on his mobility an hour a day and does this professionally for a living. And again, it's like, if you're a mom or you're a dad or you're just like a 28-year-old finance dude, what are you doing this for? Are you doing it for performance? Great. Then do it and perform really well and be really smart about it. If you're doing it for looks, do what you should do to look as good as you possibly can. And then to look at this another angle, who is like the best at doing what I want to do? If you want to be really good at CrossFit, train like a CrossFitter. If you want to have as much muscle as possible, train like people that have a lot of muscle from a bodybuilding standpoint. If you want to be strong as a mother, look at strong men, look at powerlifting. How do they lift? How do they train? How do they sleep? How do they recover? And if your goal is to, and coming all the way back to this, build muscle long term. And anytime I
Yeah.
think long term, I think, how can you do this for 10, 20 years and have zero injuries? And CrossFit for me isn't a good way to do that.
Yeah. And the most important thing they'll always come back to, and we talked about this in the last podcast as well, but it's seriously one of the most important points, I think, for the average person, for the gen pop. Just because something feels really difficult it's not necessarily equated with efficiency. So the reason a lot of people like CrossFit is because you leave there, you're sweaty, you're sore, your muscles are tired, you've been breathing heavily, you get those endorphins of a hard workout. And that's all well and good, but that's not necessarily indicative of a 1-for-1 with progress. Whereas a workout that Paul and I could create for you, maybe you leave the gym and you're tired, but you're not smoked. You're not, just dead for the rest of the day. You're feeling good, but you're not feeling like you completely wore down your body. And so if you were to, in your mind, equate, oh, well, I have a little bit left in the tank. I probably didn't push as hard as as hard as I could have, as far as I should have. So I'm leaving results on the table. And that's not true at all. Going back to the RPE example, the reason that you don't go to failure every time is because you want to leave some room for your body to adapt and recover. So it's just so important to note that. I mean, I feel like I talk about this so constantly because it's so important, but it's important to know that how hard a workout feels is not indicative of the progress it's going to give you or the efficiency of the workout. So just keep that in mind.
Yep. 100%. Cool. I think we hammered that one. Let's dive into the next one.
Yeah. So the next one here, something that I got a question on. What are the different sources of energy for the body? And in addition, can muscle be turned into fat? And will my muscle ever be used as fuel? So diving into the first part of this question, what are the different sources of energy for the body? There is the 3 macronutrients. There's carbs, fats, and protein. So as far as your body using these for energy, the main source of energy for the body is going to be carbs. So your body is going to turn carbs into glucose and store that extra glucose as glycogen. That's what we use whenever we work out at any sort of moderate or high intensity. We're using those carbs. Fats are more so going to be used for any really low intensity, not even exercise, but just low intensity activity. So you're using fat as fuel anytime you're walking or just doing regular daily activities. Your body prefers to use fat and carbs as fuel and protein as just a muscle building component, the building block of muscle using those amino acids. Your body can, if you go into a deep enough calorie deficit or you're making protein a very, very, very large part of your diet, turn protein into glucose and glycogen by a process called gluconeogenesis. That's not going to happen very often, but suffice it to say that it's important to eat a well-balanced amount of macronutrients because they're all used for a different purpose. Fats and proteins in particular are essential for the body, meaning we can't function without having some proteins and fats. Carbs are not essential because the body can use protein as fuel, because it can use fat as fuel. But that being said, just about 99% of people are going to benefit from having carbs in their diet because it's so much easier for the body to use these carbs for exercise. Even on top of that, your body uses carbs for fuel for your brain. A lot of people that go on a keto or low carb diet will notice that their thinking becomes really foggy. Their exercise is really, really poor quality because the body isn't pulling that glucose that it needs. So as far as sources of energy for the body, it's really important to include carbs on a regular basis. I usually just tell people have enough carbs that you're never feeling run down during a workout. So even on a diet on a cut, when you're in a calorie deficit, most say just for like an average size man, like 170, 180 pounds, you typically don't want to go much under like 1 gram of carbs per pound of body weight. And on a bulk, on a muscle building cycle, it can even be as much as 2 times your body weight. So 350, 400 grams of carbs. But as far as the body using muscle for fuel, that is something that is not going to happen unless, again, you're in a severe point of calorie deficit, of starvation. I got to be kind of careful using that word because I know that another very long-standing myth is that your body can go into starvation mode and start using muscle as fuel. Your body treats muscle as very sacred and holds on to it as much as it can because muscle is so much more important to the body than fat. Your body is always preferentially going to burn food that you're taking in and fat before it ever burns muscle. So don't worry about your body catabolizing its muscle, using it as fuel. Your body is always going to want to hold on to muscle. So one thing that I always try to keep in mind and remind clients is that I think I'm not citing anything specifically, but I know I've heard from people like Layne Norton that muscle is something like it takes about a fourth of the effort it takes to put it on to keep it on. So once you put on muscle, your body wants to hold on to that and keep it. So don't worry about your body using muscle as fuel. That's not going to happen except for under really extreme extraneous conditions. Even if you work out fasted, if you know, a lot of people get nervous. They don't want to work out fasted. They think they have to have something in your body. And if that just helps you feel better and helps you perform better, that's all well and good. But you don't have to worry about your body catabolizing itself if you go and train fasted or anything like that. Oh, and then as far as the component of can your muscle turn into fat, your body can only make fat and make muscle, or sorry, yeah, make fat and make muscle. So there's no process in the body where muscle can literally biologically turn into fat. I know that's another myth that gets propagated too. So yes, you might gain fat and gain muscle at the same time. You might do one and not the other, but never is one going to turn into the other biologically.
Yeah. A couple things I want to dive into a little bit with that. And you talked about the 3 different macros, um, and protein, carbs, and fat. A lot of diets and a lot of people get attention by creating fear around a certain one, right? Fat
Mm-hmm.
is bad, carbs are bad. I've had clients say, oh, my friends say I'm having too much protein, so I need to stop, right? First of all, don't get advice from people that you don't want to trade places with, right? Now, there's a counterpoint to that. Just because someone has a body that you want to trade places with doesn't mean that you should take exactly what they say as gospel. And
Right.
so one lens that I think is really helpful with this is don't create problems for yourself that don't already exist. So a lot of people will say, "Oh, I don't want to eat that much protein. I heard it can be bad for your kidneys." Well, until you know that you have kidney disease, or until you know that you're not digesting it, or until you know that there's an issue, don't create an issue. Until you know that you can't break down as many carbs, maybe you're insulin sensitive or you're pre-diabetic, or you've got some other condition where you need to bring carbohydrates down, don't create that problem for you. You're creating a problem. I heard carbs make me fat, so I'm going to avoid them and create more problems because I heard I potentially might run into a problem 10 years down the road because my coworker Sally saw something in a magazine, right? Like that's not based off of either science, that's not based off of what you're experiencing. I think that's the biggest thing is like, what are you experiencing? Test it, see which one makes you feel better, which one gives you better results, go that way, right? Because everyone is a unique individual. And then same thing for fats. People will be like, oh, I read that you can, live entirely off fats and I'll do keto. Or I read that fat's really bad. Well, do you know that? Have you experienced that? Are you running into that currently? Like, is that already a concern for you? Do you need to cut your fats down? Like, I think that's another angle to think through this, and that's why it's so valuable to have someone to be working with, because we're going to go and look at these for you and really try and deduce 1 to 1 or 1 to 0.9 and get as close as we can to correlations as to like, hey, yeah, that's actually what's happening. As opposed
Mm-hmm.
to if you're just intuitively going at it off of feelings and off of thoughts and being irrational, you're going to change direction and just make some dumb choices.
Yeah, and if you look around online, you can find I'm going to use again like air quotes here, like evidence that any sort of macronutrient is bad for you. If you tried to eliminate every food that the internet tells you is bad for you, you'd have nothing left to eat. So I think the smartest diet is the most intuitive, where what does someone think when they think a healthy diet? Lean proteins, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, healthy fats. It's really to some extent, it's that simple, making that stuff the bulk of your diet. And unless you have a really specific reason, I don't think it's useful to cut out any macronutrient or any specific food for that matter. When it comes to those whole foods, those natural foods, they should make up a large percentage of your diet, the bulk of it, but also not being afraid to include some of your favorite foods that you see as unhealthy. Again, something that Paul and I will often talk to clients about is no foods are unhealthy. Some can be more or less calorically dense in combination with being more or less nutrient dense, but no foods are inherently going to be bad for you unless they're taken in excess.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to the last question around just will my body ever use muscle for fuel? That's why it's so important to make sure you're eating enough, make sure you're getting enough protein, because if
Mm-hmm.
you are in a situation to where your body doesn't have fat reserves or doesn't have glucose, it's got to go and get it from somewhere. And that's where it's going to break down catabolized muscle protein, or sorry, it's going to break down the muscle. And you don't want to do that. You spend a lot of time and effort and energy, and it's hard for the body to create muscle. So don't undo that work by not getting enough protein or not eating enough.
Yeah, you got to send that message to the body that things are okay. We have enough. Ways to not do that are A, overtraining, and B, undereating. So as long as you're doing those things consistently, you're not going to be able to build muscle at the rate you want to.
Yep, 100%. I think that's all the questions we had. Any other
Yeah, that's all we
last
had marked
thoughts?
off on there.
Yeah, that's all we had marked
I
off.
think this was a good, informative podcast. I like all the stuff we got out there today. So yeah, as always, be sure to follow up with Paul or I with any clarifications, further questions. We always love hearing from you guys.
Yeah, and then a couple housekeeping things in the show notes. You'll find a couple things. One, link to the Mindful Muscle Facebook group. That's where you can ask these questions or get context to the questions that were answered on the podcast. So be sure and join that. Link is going to be in the description there. If you are in the Seattle area, we got a awesome opportunity for you to get meals sent delivered to your door through Fuller NutriFuel. Use the code Paul15 for 15% off your first order. I've already had a bunch of, I actually had a client say this to me yesterday, and I was checking in with him. He's like, dude, I started using the meal prep service, and he said, the kitchen is clean, the laundry is done, the house is in order. This is the only thing I've changed. And he literally said, like, this is the only thing I've introduced into my life. And because I don't have to think about cooking and because my kitchen's not a mess, everything else has fallen into place. And he's like, it's a little weird. Like, I'm a little like weirded out by how much like free time and space and clarity I have. And he even said, like, I'm excited to look at my credit card statement this month, which is what happens when you stop eating out and spending a bunch of money and you just got food
Mm-hmm.
delivered to you and you end up saving money. I know a lot of people have a concern around, oh, I don't know if I can afford that. And it's like, well, the average order of DoorDash is $36. So if you're doing any type of eating out or any type of ordering in, you are spending way more than what ends up being like 10 to 15 bucks, 15 on the high end if you aren't using the discount code. So definitely jump on that. And if you're not in the Seattle area, we're working on making it be more expansive, more nationwide, but definitely in the Seattle area. I know a ton of people listen to this podcast in the Seattle area. So jump on that. Fuller NutriFuel. Show notes are going to have the description and the link. And then Paul 15 for your first order, Paul 10 for subsequent orders after that.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening, guys. Thanks.
Yeah, we got one
Paul, for a
more.
great show.
We got one more call out. We got the book review next week.
Yeah.
Yep. Stillness is the Key. We'll round out the trinity of Ryan Holiday books. Jake and I will be doing a review of Stillness is the Key. And if you haven't had a chance to catch Ego is the Enemy and The Obstacle is the Way, which we did this week, definitely go and check those out. People have been loving those podcasts, been getting really good feedback because those are just almost like guides. If you follow the principles in those books and in life, your life is going to be so much better. And it's fun reading. We're readers now.
Yeah, big time.
Mindful muscle, not meathead muscle, not mindless muscle, mindful muscle. Fill your mind with good stuff and you will think, speak, and act in the way that you want to.
That's right.
Cool. All right, man. Everyone, thank you for joining, and we'll catch you guys next time on the Mindful Muscle podcast.
Yep. Thanks, guys.